Hey, how's it going everyone? My name is Brandon Clements and welcome back to another video here on Glass Hand. It's been a long time, but I'm glad to be back and talking about translucency in Unreal Engine, specifically using translucency with Lumen. So we're going to go over every single thing in this video, from project settings, post-process volume, all the way down into the materials, and I'm going to explain everything as thoroughly as possible with multiple different shading models that we're going to look at and use, and we're going to describe why you would want to use certain shading models in certain instances and things like that. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in. There's a lot to talk about and cover. The first thing is, let's just kind of give a little introduction to our dragons here. Okay, yes, looking very nice and sorting properly, as you can see, in depth with depth of field, and also drawing properly. So like we have our translucency priorities set up correctly, and yeah, everything's looking really good. So let's talk about what we're going to do and what we're looking at. So this first one is Subsurface. So this is actually an opaque model, but in the light of translucency, if you will, in light of translucency, we're going to talk about even things that can penetrate the surface. You know, light can actually transmit and enter the surface and then scatter and then exit. So Subsurface actually falls into this, I would say. So we're going to talk about that. We also have a refractive material, and you can see these are small objects too, so I think it makes it even a little more impressive. But we have a refractive material that is blurry, that you can't see through, basically. You kind of can, but yeah, so we're going to talk about blurry refractions, because that's really not talked about a lot in Unreal Engine specifically. And now we're entering another shading model here. So this is the surface translucency volume shading model right next to the forward shading lighting model. So these are two different ways that you can actually interact with lights and the materials within the scene using translucency. So we're going to take a look at that. And then this is actually thin translucency, which is probably, I would say, the most expensive shading model here. I mean, if we go up into let's see, our buffer visualizations, we are going to look at optimization modes, shader complexity. As you can see, all of these are pretty expensive, meaning the bright colors at the very end are very expensive. But you know what? Modern day GPUs are actually pretty dang good at rendering this stuff. You can also see we're in cinematic scalability. Okay, cool. So now that we have a small tour of what we're going to talk about, let's go into our project settings window. So I'll bring that over here. And if we scroll down to our rendering settings, this is where we're going to want to spend most of our time in the project settings. So let's talk about under materials, we have energy conservation checked on for this. Now, I believe in the later versions, the newer versions of the engine, this is going to be on by default, especially with substrate. So if you're unfamiliar with substrate, that's going to be the new materials and new shading that's going to be coming in for like layering materials and doing all kinds of wacky, cool, awesome stuff that you can do in offline render engines, but you can't really do in rasterization engines just because it's very hard. But substrate offers us a way forward. So that is enabled in my project. Let's keep going and talk about, of course, we're using Lumen, as the thumbnail probably said, what led you to this video. So we're using Lumen. We are also using hardware ray tracing when available, hit lighting for reflections, the hit lighting ray mode. So we're actually doing a little bit of ray tracing for reflections. High quality translucent reflections are turned on. Of course, detail tracing, so we're having more to trace against. And then the ray trace translucent reflections is turned on. I'm not so sure if this is actually hooked up in Unreal Engine 5.4, which I failed to mention we're using. I'm assuming this is kind of a way forward for doing ray trace refractions, meaning like if you had a glass sphere and you were looking through it, if you know anything about refractions, it would be that you would see the world flipped upside down. I'm hoping that this is some, groundwork for Epic laying down ray trace refractions. I did not actually see any of that happening in this project, sadly. Okay, shadow map is virtual shadow maps. We, of course, have hardware ray tracing, and then also in our, let's just flip over really quick, bear with me, to our platform settings. Under Windows, we are using DirectX 12 with shader model 6. Okay, so that's really important to have enabled in your project. Let's go back to rendering again. And I'm using the right mouse button, by the way, to get the hand to kind of grab and push and scroll. I like doing that in Unreal Engine. Okay, some more very important render settings for translucency. I disabled separate translucency. I think by default this is turned on, but if you hover, it says allow translucency to be rendered on a separate render target and composited after depth of field prevents translucency from appearing out of focus. Okay, that's something that I probably would want to set to false if I was doing cinematic rendering. So, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but something that I just felt like I needed to turn off, and I got a really cool result out of. And then enable order independent transparency. So this is a really interesting thing. With this turned on, you more or less don't have to do the translucent priorities. So if you're unfamiliar with how rasterization engines work, things have to render in order from obviously the background to foreground, and it doesn't really work that way. It can actually go based on complexity of the shaders, and there's a lot of things that come into play here. And honestly, it's above my pay grade, but depends on which RHI and all this stuff. But you can use software like RenderDocs to actually show how things are rendering in order. It's very cool. It's very trippy. But with this order independent transparency enabled, you're gonna stay away from most of that. Hopefully, it's gonna fix most of your problems just auto-magically, right? But it does a really good job. I have to say, it does a very, very good job. So if you want to actually set the order of things manually, which is on the static meshes in the detail panel, you're probably gonna want to turn this off. So words to the wise there. Let's see, what else do we have here? I believe everything else is pretty much stock. I'm just going to do one more pass through here in case anything pops up. But no, I think we're good. I think we're good. All right, and I just can't help myself. But hey, this is good for you guys who can pause the video and just see what render settings I have. Also, I failed to mention, I'll put this up on Gumroad, this project, so if you want to download it and use these shaders and materials in your projects, you're more than welcome to do so. Okay, so let's start out with this guy here. So this first dragon, this is, of course, the subsurface shading model. So we have that enabled. We are opaque, and a lot of what's important in this video is going to appear in the details panel of the material itself. Now, these are switches that you can turn on and off so that you gain performance, or, if you want to have expensive materials, you're going to find most of these settings over here. Okay, so I have two-sided enabled just to make sure if there was any kind of backside that was showing, it would be rendered. But with this, it's an opaque model, so you could probably just go ahead and disable that. That's not very important for this rendering mode, or this shading model, I should say. Moving on, I'm just going to call out some of the ones that are important. But it looks like with this model, we're pretty good. Okay, so not anything to note in this opaque subsurface mode. So I'm going to just kind of gently walk through this material because I understand that it's chaotic, and most of the stuff I do in Blueprints kind of looks chaotic, and I apologize for those of you who have been watching the channel and try to keep up with some of this. So the high level here is that I'm just using the Fresnel node here, and if you preview this node, Fresnel basically gives you the 0 degree and the 90 degree like glancing angle of this material or mesh, sorry. So this is all shaded based on the camera view, so it's very camera dependent, but it gives you this this really cool physically correct phenomenon. Fresnel actually does happen on a lot of different materials, and this is kind of hard coded into most materials, but you can gain access to it by using Fresnel, and you can drive a bunch of different tricks for lack of a better term with it. So like I can change the specularity based on the grazing or glancing angle or facing angle. So what I do is I take a Fresnel, I run it through a lerp, and then I set a min and max. So the min is going to be the facing angle and the max will be the glancing angles. And I can set up a bunch of parameters based on this simple idea, and then drive my material instance with it and just kind of play with it more or less to get a result that I like. Now, when I say play with it, I'm meaning this to get as close as possible to the path tracer, because the path tracer, if you're not familiar with offline rendering, is probably the closest thing that we can get to ground truth as of right now in current day rendering and computer graphics. Yeah, path tracing just fires a bunch of rays from the camera out into the scene and shades the pixels accordingly based on lighting positions, material quality, all that kind of stuff. So you can use the path tracing quality switch replace to actually substitute when you're in the rendering, the path tracing rendering pipeline. You can set the parameters based on that. Okay, so that's what I tried to do. So if I come back over and look at this in path tracing, you can see that immediately the shading quality goes through the roof, right? I mean, it looks really amazing, and you kind of get this phenomenon where the light enters the surface and then exits with a different color. So you kind of have this like bluish color that when it exits, and it has this kind of yellowy material where the light actually hits. Okay, so that is what I've tried to do here, is look at the lit mode in Lumen and try my best to get as close as possible to path tracing, and I think that kind of helps me you know, for setting up a groundwork for these materials so they can kind of get as close as possible. And Lumen does already an excellent job, especially with opaque materials, at matching the path tracer. And I know that Epic actually uses this internally to kind of judge and test Lumen and the quality of Lumen. Okay, so with the path tracer, there are a few extra nodes here. So this subsurface medium, this is the mean free path, which we do have access to mean free path in the substrate materials. So this will kind of be the way forward for substrate. But this is basically how deep is the surface based in centimeters for an object or for the material. What does it do? How does it change once it enters in this threshold? And then the scattering distribution is basically, does it point towards the light or away from the light? So this is kind of like forward or back scattering, as you may have heard of it in other rendering engines. And so, yeah, it floats between -1 and 1. And that's what kind of gives you the quality of subsurface scattering in the real world. Okay, so those are actually added to the graph. And then I have a material function here. So there's two material functions in this project, which is a really good way to grab this project that I've created. So we have a curvature material function, and this is basically all that we have here. And if we go back into the graph, and let's go into our content drawer really fast and grab the dragon. So if you have that selected in your content drawer, and then you click this brick kind of icon, you can actually look at the dragon in the kind of shading preview mode here as you're building your shader. So let me just kind of, and he's tiny, so trying to get a good look here so I can start previewing this node. And now you can see with this material function, we are getting a curvature map, more or less. So similar to the Fresnel. So if we preview the Fresnel, we kind of get a forward glancing angle. And if we look at the curvature, we actually get the detail being outlined in the model. Okay, so you can take both of these material functions and go nuts with them. So there's a curvature here, and then there is also a triplanar, a very cheap triplanar function there. So let's go ahead and stop previewing that. And I'm using the curvature to more or less just add some dark areas using the ambient occlusion, which I failed to mention another project setting that we need to have disabled, I believe. So let's go into rendering, and it is under, I only know it by its name, sadly. Let's see, it is allow static lighting. Okay, yes, allow static lighting. So with this disabled, you actually gain access to the ambient occlusion. This actually starts working a lot better with allow static lighting disabled, because our lighting in this project is all dynamic completely. Okay, so that allows us to kind of change some of the coloration and some of the material properties inside some of these darker crevices and on the curves of this model on the detail. Okay, cool. So yeah, again, just to recap, abuse Fresnel and abuse the lerp nodes, and then also use like your path tracing quality switch to set the mode, or basically just set the parameters for when you switch to path tracing. Try to match it as best as you can, and then yeah, you can create material instances out of that and go to town, and then change them in the viewport. So what you would do is want to right click, create material instance. We'll drag this into our material instance folder, and then we can drag that onto our model. And then once we enable this, we can start futzing with all the different properties here. And so I'm cheating a bit. I'm using like emissive as well to kind of boost the intensity of the subsurface scattering. So that's not physically correct, but it can deliver a cool result. The hardest thing I've noticed with the path tracer and with just the lumen shading is that this milky quality is like very hard to do in rasterization. Yeah, it's crazy because you have that milky quality, but you also retain a lot of detail. And so I'm excited to see where this goes in Lumen, what they end up doing with this subsurface model. Okay, continuing on. So let's go ahead and click yes here. So the next dragon that we have in line is a, let's look at the parent material. I named this standard glass. So this is basically like a form of glass that you would create in a project. So I have another material in here. Let me just drag it on. Let's see. So if I go to my translucent folder, it's called boring glass. So let's add boring glass. So what is boring glass? That's a ridiculous name, but this is basically what you would see from like documentation or just kind of standard information online. I'll walk through it really quick with you. It's just a color, you know, a metallic. So glass is a dielectric, so it's not a conductor. So it's not metallic is what I should say. So I set that to 0, turn the specular up to 1, you know, have a very shiny surface by having it low in roughness, and then have a little bit of opaque quality to it with 0.25 so that you can actually see it in the viewport. And then the translucent, two-sided, and then this is set to surface translucency volume, okay? And so these different lighting modes, they basically are ordered in how expensive they are as they go down. So surface forward shading is the most costly lighting mode, and surface forward shading is actually very good at picking up the lights within the scene and rendering them on top of the glass, basically giving you sharper reflections. But surface translucency volume is it still works really good with deferred rendering, and you know, it's the most costly lighting model, but it's also blurry, okay, until you move into like the forward shading path. So I have that set to translucency volume just to kind of show you. And then also this translucency pass. Right now I have it set to after depth of field, but you should want to set that to before depth of field, so that we're drawing it and then we draw depth of field on top, so that it sits nicely into the scene. But there's also one other. Oh, sorry, this is boring glass, of course. So what I meant to say with boring glass is, yeah, you may not see that in forums unless you're searching for it. So it's not going to sort very well. So let's go back to our camera so we can just maybe kind of exemplify that a little bit. So let's see if I go out of cinematic scalability, obviously, and maybe go into like high and jump out of the camera. And let's kind of go back over here. You can see that it's not sorting properly at all. Okay, so these scalability settings do make a huge difference, but you can see even at the default epic level, it doesn't want to sort properly. And if I was to jump into our camera once again, and let me unlock it. I'm also using the motion design template. So if you guys are, sorry, not template, module. So if you search for motion design, I love a lot of the tools, and I actually have some videos here on the channel that you should check out that exclusively talk about motion design, but I do like the interface quite a lot. So yeah, if we were to jump out of this and unlock our camera, you know, I have a very, very shallow depth of field. You can see that it actually doesn't fit into the scene properly. Because we're rendering the material after depth of field. So even if I put this to before depth of field on boring glass, it fits within the scene a bit better, but still we may have problems with this sorting properly. Okay. So yeah, you can see there that, again, it's looking kind of weird. It just looks kind of blurry, out of focus. And, you know, if we go up to engine scalability, cinematic, even if we go up to the highest potential possibility, it's not going to look good until we actually output depth and velocity. So what this does is it actually writes to our depth buffer, even though it is a translucent material. Again, this is more of a expensive kind of thing to do. But yeah, you can see now that it should sort just a little bit better. But yeah, you can tell that it's weird, and I'm not sure how well this is going to come across in the YouTube video compression, but there's still one more attribute that we'll want to change, and that is going to be, let's find it together, this opacity mask. Okay, so this clip value, it's set to 0.33 repeating by default, but if we place that to 0 and then we save, now you can see it actually sorts a lot better, and suddenly our boring glass actually looks not too bad. So thanks, boring glass, for helping us learn and go through this together. So I'll go ahead and you can still see, even with all those changes made, that without adding, let me add a material instance of standard glass. So I have frosted glass here. You can see now that even using this material that I've created, you can gain some really interesting looks by utilizing Fresnel, utilizing some different material functions that I've created. And let's go ahead and do like clean glass. Okay, so this is like a cleaner glass using surface surface translucency volume. Mouthful. Okay, so let's take a look at standard glass, what this actually derives from, and why it looks so good. There's a few things to call out here. So let's go ahead and jump into, let me throw clean glass. Oh yeah, clean glass is on our second dragon here. So there's something here that says use vertex normal, and if we jump into here, basically the Fresnel is looking for a normal, and if you don't put anything in it, it says it defaults to pixel world normal, which is just one of the buffers in the G buffer that shows the world normals for all the meshes in the scene. But if you set this to vertex normal, So notice pixel normal is going to be false. So yeah, vertex normal, this will actually take into account the material, or I'm sorry, the mesh. It will take into account the mesh. And so let me just make this a little tinier. There's never enough screen real estate, especially when you're making videos. Let me put this next to, oh my goodness, to the dragon. This global switch here, and I did not organize these properly, so I apologize, but I'm lazy. If I tick this on and tick this off, you can definitely see a massive difference. And so having this enabled gives it more thickness, it feels like to me, than anything. So that is using the vertex normals in the Fresnel option, okay, which should give us a better looking Fresnel, or just a different looking Fresnel. And then I also have another material function that's built into here. So right here, this cheap triplanar. So this is something that you can find literally by Googling cheap triplanar. I've used it for years just as a quick way to have things in the world just have tileable materials. If you're unfamiliar with triplanar, it basically projects from 6 different vantage points. So top, bottom, left, right, front, back. And that allows your texture to tile a little bit better. Of course, this does have seams. It does not have blurry edges to it. But, you know, taking a bump map that's like a grain going into here, you can kind of create the illusion of some frosted glass. So if I was to come in here to this flatness, it's set to 1, which means it's completely flat. If I set this to like -0.5, you can start to see that we get a little bit of a frosted look to this. And you can still see through it a little bit, but if you increase the opacity, it's going to help you create more of a frosted glass effect. Now, it's not, you know, it's not a perfect solution for this, but you can see, like, as you close in on 1 for opacity max, you can kind of create something that looks like frosted glass. Again, this isn't true like blurry refractions. As you increase the roughness, we only increase the roughness of the reflected light, not the pixels that are drawn behind our object. Okay, so I believe these two have the same material because they've been kind of moving in motion with one another. So yeah, cool. So let's go ahead and just, I'm just going to turn flatness back to 1 for our clean. Okay, move forward. So the difference between these two, from this dragon to the dragon on the right here, is the dragon on the right is using the other lighting mode. So what lighting mode is that? The forward shading lighting mode. So it's literally the same master material as what I showed you before, as the standard glass. Literally everything is completely the same. You know, we even got logic in here for the path tracer, but the only thing that's different is under the lighting mode, it's set to surface forward shading. And you can tell immediately next to one another that, yes, there is some metallic in here. So if I was to turn this, let's just turn this down. Even with the metallic turned down so that our reflections are not almost like fully reflective on the surface as a whole, that the shading from the lights are much more intense. The one on the left kind of looks a little milky and not as bright as the reflections on the right. So that's going to be straight away out of the gates. You're going to get that with the forward shading lighting model. Okay. So let's move on to the last guy here. And what is so special about him is this is actually a really cool shading model, and it's called thin translucency. So this is used for things that have a very thin surface. And in the real world, when you see these kind of things, think of like almost like a thin plastic or a thin glass, but usually like they're tinted in some way. Okay, so what you can do with this model is you can have a color for, I'm gonna make this big real quick. Sorry, no more pretty stuff. You can actually have an output color for the transmittance, and then you can have a color that goes into base color. And those two are determined by the opacity. So if I was to tweak the opacity here, I'm gonna bet that you might not be able to see this. So, oh, sorry, the colors. Let me do just a quick change here. So let's do a wacky color like red. This is why it wasn't working, because I have color going into both the same thing. So let's do a red here, so we can clearly see the difference. Oops, a red. Okay, we'll save. And you can kind of see the effect that's happening in this shading ball right here. But you can blend between using opacity, the blue and the red. So like as I increase this, you can see that we turn red and then we blend to blue. And of course I'm using the Fresnel, so you know, you can kind of play with this and drive it any way you want. Create that as another parameter, which I should have done, because that's what makes this model so amazing to use, is being able to blend two different colors. And it also sorts very well. Just like straight out of the gates, this is probably the best sorting model out there. So it's yeah, it's a very good shading model. It's super cool. And so yeah, you can create a lot of really cool effects with that. I believe that's the only major difference with the thin translucency model. Let's go ahead and take a look at the parameters. So we have translucent set to thin translucent shading model, two-sided. And we also have cast dynamic shadow as masked, which allows me to actually get a shadow into the scene. Because yes, glass and translucent objects, nothing in the real world is 100% absorbing light, and nothing in the world 100% reflects light, and nothing in the world 100% transmits light. It's always kind of like the energy is always conserved, and you know, if it's 20% absorbed, then it's like 80% reflected, you know. And so even though we can't get a physically accurate shadow onto the ground here, allowing us to cast dynamic shadow as masks and then setting the clip value to 0 still allows us to have a shadow. So if I turn this off, then you can see that we have no shadow on the floor whatsoever. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn that back on. Okay, cool. And scrolling down, I do have screen space reflections turned on as well. So this is another parameter that does make a difference on a lot of shading models. So if I turn that off and on, you can see just a tiny bit of difference with on this mode. It's not quite as intense as some of the other lighting modes and shading models, but definitely something you'll want to turn on or off depending on your situation. I have it set to surface forward shading to get the bright highlights. And then I am outputting depth and velocity and rendering this in the translucency pass before depth of field. And then I also have refraction turned on. So index of refraction, that's something that I have saved for last, because turning on index of refraction right here also introduces some weird sorting issues for me. And I'm sure this is something that I'm doing. So please let me know in the comment section if I'm doing something just super wacky and I shouldn't be doing this. Okay, so anyways, you can tell everything sorts properly. And then if I turn on IOR, so if you're unfamiliar with index of refraction, it's basically the warbliness. If you're staring through a glass object, objects on the other side of that glass kind of appear like bent and warped. That's a phenomenon that happens with refraction in glass objects. Okay, so the glass objects are usually around 1.59, and then you can tell immediately that, yeah, we do get a cool warbly kind of woo look here as we stare through this, but also the sorting has broke completely. So you can see one is in terms of IOR numbers means no IOR or no refractive qualities whatsoever. It's basically air. But if I increase this to 1.59, immediately our sorting breaks and things start to look really weird and wacky and not looking too good here. So again, I'll show you kind of the shader itself, and help me out if I'm doing something weird here. But I'm basically using Fresnel into the alpha, and so the IOR is only appearing on the edge of the model. Okay, so that's what's happening there. And even if I do like the inverse of this, so like 1 divided by 1.59, which is like something in this neighborhood, it gives a kind of interesting result. But again, still no dice with the sorting. I have to essentially disable it to get proper sorting with other shading models here. Okay. Okay, the very last thing I want to talk about before I leave you today is the way that this is lit and set up. And I'm not gonna lie, I stole this from the MetaHumans. You know, I took a page from the MetaHumans lighting project, which is completely free on the marketplace. So I like the way that it's set up. They have these groups. So we have like a key light. But underneath of that, I've enabled motion design to get this really cool rectangle. This derives from the shape components and the dynamic mesh, dynamic mesh class, I believe, to create like these cards, for lack of a better term, in the viewport. And these have an emissive shader on them, so very simple emissive shader set with a high multiplier. Okay. And why do I have this in here? Well, with these guys, if I disable this rectangle, let me go ahead and just disable all the rectangles all at once and make sure I grab them. Okay, these two. You can see immediately that some of these lights, so that's with them on and that's with them off. The rectangle lights in particular, notice the rectangle kind of icon. They don't reflect as well as they should. Okay, so these rectangles are literally the same size as the rectangle lights. They're just providing a lot better illumination into the scene. So I think this is a downfall of Lumen in this particular build of the engine. And you can see that the surface forward shading does a lot better at drawing the lighting into the scene, but the surface translucency volume and even the thin translucency model, they kind of fall a little bit short of reflecting the scene properly. And so just to kind of drive that point home really quick, I'm going to show you the difference when I disable and enable these. So you can see that it just boosts the highlights just a bit more. Okay, bonus tip. I have one more thing I want to show you, and in my translucent folder, I do have a two-sided foliage shading model, so I'll just drag this onto here. And the cool thing about using the two-sided foliage model is you can see here's the shading model, two-sided foliage, two-sided, cast dynamic shadows. I should probably turn this to 0. As we go down further, surface forward shading, output depth and velocity, before depth of field. We should have all the things ticked that we want to have ticked. Yeah, I believe you can even, since it is a translucent shading model, you could turn on index of refraction if you wanted to. So with this shading model, the cool thing is, oh yeah, even with index of refraction turned on, which is set to 1, you could see that it does some weird things. So if I was to turn that off, you can see it sorts better. So just something to know, as you're building your project out. Okay, back to what's cool about this guy. I'm going to right click, create material instance, and then drag it into my material instance folder. And let's open that up. Okay, so the cool thing about this model is that, yeah, we can still do like subsurface scattering, more or less, but we can do it on an object that is like semi-translucent. So we can bring the opacity min like way down. You can bring the opacity max down, of course, if you like. But yeah, this gives us an even more flexible shading model to create some interesting looking results here. And you can see as I bring this up, this is the Fresnel that's driving the actual Fresnel curve on the model. You can see that you can kind of create it more of a waxy kind of look. And then you can also do more of a glass kind of look. So yeah, it's a really cool model that, yeah, you know, a lot of people reserve it for foliage and things like that, of course, which is great. But yeah, if you combine that with some other cool things like normals, so I have a normal map that's tiling with my triplanar. Yeah, you can get some really, really interesting results. And so let's go ahead and change, I don't know, this to a color like this maybe, and pipe that up. And then you can also intensify the subsurface effect by adding like a multiply into here. So you could hold M, left click, get a multiply node, right click, promote to parameter, call this SSS mult. Now this is probably going to be so wild and wacky, but let's go ahead and just increase this from 0 to 20. So our slider goes up to 20. Now we have it over here. And as I increase this, you can see I can kind of get different looks and different results from this shading model. Oh, and there's one more thing before I finally leave you, and that is my post-process settings. I'm just going to, you know, breeze through these really quick. I do have the film curve adjusted, so there's a little bit more of a lift to the dark areas. Global illumination set to Lumen. I've got Lumen pumped up to the max, which is apparently 4 in the quality settings. I am using screen trace. I do have multiple bounces. I am, you know, the roughness trace is set to 1 for everything, for pretty much all pixels. And then for path tracing, I have it set to 8. My exposure in the scene is set to 4, so I have this set to 6 so that it can hopefully render faster with less noise and less fireflies. Reference depth of field for those other shots, and that's about it. And the elephant in the room that I want to mention is the ray tracing translucency here. So you have 2 different ways to render translucency in Unreal Engine. You have the raster, and then you have this ray tracing pipeline. Now this pipeline is the deprecated DXR real-time ray tracing API that came out, I believe, in like 4.22 or something like that. So this ray tracing switch does not actually, if I turn this on, work with Lumen. So yeah, if you'd like to use that, by all means, more power to you. But that's not going to be the way going forward. As I understand it, it's going to look really weird. And, you know, of course, this scene is very simple. But in more complex scenes, this is going to kind of break your lighting with Lumen and the Lumen scene. So unfortunately, we cannot use this this ray tracing path, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, if in the comments, if this is going to be piped into Lumen at some point. Is that where we get the rendering switch? So if we go to rendering and then down to Lumen, we have ray traced translucent refractions. Yeah, so right now the way that this is hooked up is it specifically says whether to use Lumen refraction tracing from surfaces when using hardware ray tracing, which we have, and hit lighting, which we have turned on. Although this does not trigger a shader recompile for me, so I'm sure a lot of these features are coming in the future, but as far as I understand, this ray tracing is based on the DXR libraries, and it's something that we should probably stay away from. Okay, so that's why I did not go over any of these switches in this video. All right, so that will do it for me and my pet dragons that you see here. Thank you guys so much for following along. I really do appreciate you guys even coming back to the channel, even though I go months without uploading a video. I really appreciate the support, and definitely, if you're not subscribed, subscribe to the channel, because there's going to be more Unreal Engine content coming your way, along with Blender. So Blender, Unreal Engine, those are my 2 primary apps that I work in to create immersive, interactive media. So thank you guys so much for following along. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section below. I do answer as much as I possibly can in that section. Until next time, thanks so much. Take care.